Hey guys, you're watching the Best Practices Show, where we take a look at the best business practices from the best dental practices all across the country. And if you're building a high quality restorative practice, you know how challenging that can be. And I've got my good friend, Dr. Jim Otten, today, and we're going to be talking about the 3 keys to building a prosperous, restorative-based dental practice. Do not miss this. Do me a favor, grab a pen and hit the share button. We'll see you in a few seconds. Hey guys, welcome back to the Best Practices Show. Thank you so much for watching. Like I always say, we are having so much fun doing this. So keep sharing, keep watching, keep giving us feedback. We love it. So over 18,000 followers on Facebook and over 45,000 on iTunes, which is just insane. So if you're watching these shows, don't watch them in the car, listen to them in the car. People tell me that all the time. I watched it in the car. I'm like, don't do that. So I've got my good friend, Dr. Jim Otten. You're going to love this today because building restorative practice is always a challenge. And so, here, do you have that on? You got the audio on there? So, all right. So here's what we're going to do. I've got a couple show notes. If you're watching this, we are shooting this live on Facebook. So as you have questions, feel free to add the questions to the feed. And as they come up, I'm going to ask Dr. Otten the question. I'll give it directly to him. So we'll get the answer while he's here on the show. If you have the question comes up later on, even after we're done, add the question to the feed and you'll see he's really good at getting back to you because we want you to get the most out of these shows as you're watching them, bring them back to your practice. Now, my guest today has been a good friend, great mentor of mine for, I think it's been 17 years I've known you. I moved to Kansas City. I'm a big fan of what we're going to be talking about today, which is reaching out, finding mentors. And I asked everybody, I'm moving to Kansas City, and at the time, people are like, well, you got to meet Dr. Otten. So I drove over there. I said, I guess I got to meet you. And you pulled me in, and we've been good friends ever since. And you taught me a lot, a tremendous amount. And you're going to see that today. So if you're watching, you'll see that come alive. But Jim, I know who you are. You're on you've got numerous faculty and advisor positions. I know who you are. But if somebody doesn't know who Dr. Jim Otten is, give us a little background on who you are.
Well, first, I got to thank you for the opportunity to do this. I learned way more from you than you had learned from me, and I've always been grateful for that relationship. I remember my front office person coming back to me, and my business people know that the one thing I don't want to be is interrupted, when with a patient and when I'm busy. But the front office person I had at the time said, there's this guy here out front. He seems like a pretty interesting fellow. Would you just take a minute to talk to him? You just walked in my office. And that was the beginning of the relationship. You just showed up, and you had to be somebody special to get by Lisa at the time. And it turned out to be that. So, we're going to talk about mentors and mastery and concepts like that, but you're a great mentor to me too, and one of the people I treasure in my life, and I've learned so much from you. I'm so proud of all that you've accomplished, and so proud of you bring things together. So I'm just another guy who's practicing dentistry. I'm trying to do it at the highest level I can. I've been just totally blessed and fortunate and lucky to have come into contact with people in my life like you and like so many others that have taught me so much. But, I was open to it as well. That's the key, that people show up in your life. And if you pay attention, you can really, absorb so much. Everybody you need to know is in your life. Anyone you need to have help you through the times that you struggle or to help you reach the next level is there. And that's one of the things I've learned. But I'm just doing, my thing every day, trying to do the best we can, trying to build a relationship-based practice. I've had a lot of background in education. I'm a real curious mind. And, we think we've built something very special, and it fits for me. I know it doesn't fit for everybody, but that's where we are.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to take this apart today and see how special it is. You practice in Lawrence, Kansas, which is an amazing place to be. And I love it. Now, today we're going to be talking about the 3 keys to building a, long-term prosperity and restorative based practice of relationships. Everybody wants to move in that direction in some fashion. I always believe if you get involved in dentistry, because relationships are hugely important. But before we start taking the details of this apart, Jim, why is this conversation more important now than ever?
Well, I remember, let me go back to a story with one of my original mentors, Dr. Bud Merritt. And I didn't know Dr. Merritt was going to be a mentor. He kind of chose me. And, great teachers are people who see something in you that you didn't see in yourself. And Dr. Merritt told me one day, he said, anyone can make a living at dentistry. Actually, you could be pretty mediocre and make a good living in dentistry. So you've got to want to do this for other reasons than just financial. And if you really want to learn and you really want to differentiate yourself, you really, and your practice, you really have to work at this. You really have to create a vision for yourself. And I don't think it's ever been more true than it is now. Nor do I think there's ever been a better opportunity for people who desire to have the relationship-based integrative practice, an interdisciplinary restorative practice, really where you can day-to-day say, I'm doing my best stuff, than there is now. There's a great opportunity to differentiate ourselves. There's a lot of discussion around the fear of corporate dentistry and how pervasive it's becoming. But, in fact, 65% of practices in the United States are still 1 or 2 dentist practices. And that's just not going to change overnight. It may emerge into some other models, but it's not going to change. But as it does, can you differentiate yourselves? Can you offer people exceptional value to where the person who you can connect with, the people who do business with you, who believe what you believe, as Simon Sinek says, come to you and participate in a relationship-based practice that is prosperous for everyone and mostly for the patient.
Right. And I'm going to piggyback on that because I thought, what you said is just absolutely spot on. And if you're a dentist watching this, let me remind you of a couple things that are absolutely true. Dentistry, again, was ranked the #1 profession in the United States, not in healthcare, but in all of the jobs you could ever pick. It is #1 when it comes to work-life balance ratio, income, all of those things. And it's consistently in the top 10. Now, in the human disposition, we always like to complain that maybe we don't have everything perfect. And that's just true. But in the opportunity where so much information is getting pumped to the internet, where people are more confused now than ever, this is a great opportunity as a dentist to say, hey, look, I got a great job. I got a great opportunity to write. You live in America, or if you live other places, you live in great countries where you can positively influence people, create your own business. Now, I can't speak for other countries, but I want to add one stat that I love that'll support what you're saying. Dentists have a 0.1% unemployment rate. 0.1%. That means if you have a friend who has a dental degree that can't find a job, they've got real problems. Like I think it's got to be one of the lowest unemployment rates of all professions, period. 0.1%. So the opportunities now. So, and I think, Jim, you would agree to this. You don't have to do it one way. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You don't have to subscribe to a black or white theory. The key is that if you enjoy your practice, it's a reflection of your core values. That's where it starts to take off. And you'll see this in Jim's keys on how he did it his way. So, Jim, what did you do? What was one of the first things? And we've pointed to this already. What was the first key for you?
Well, the first key to me is mastery and mentorship. So after Dr. Merritt and I had those conversations, I decided that I needed to seek out the best. Who was really doing this stuff in the way that was consistent with my values. I had built a large practice of several thousand patients coming out of dental school. And one day I had an associate, 2 hygienists, and me, and the place was busy and buzzing, and it was profitable. But the hygienist was breathing down my neck. My procedure wasn't going well. My associate was over there telling somebody about a procedure that I disagreed how that was going to be approached. I could hear the conversation. So I could feel my blood pressure just going up and up and up, and the top of my head was about to explode. I pushed my chair out in the hallway, and I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so I started to seek out people. And you've heard, Bill Robbins talk about this, and everyone has been on your show has talked about this same key point. But it's worth mentioning. Find someone who you can look to emulate. And I think there's several characteristics that are really important when you start thinking about mastery, and that's resiliency. Resiliency, I think, is absolutely the key core competency one has to have. You've got to be able to overcome the social pressure, the internal pressure that you sometimes create for yourselves, and have the courage to move in the direction that you see fit for yourself. But you've got models out there. You've got people out there. You have to have that courage, and you have to have some ambiguity tolerance. It doesn't always go exactly the way you think it's going to go. You can want to do a new patient evaluation, a comprehensive evaluation for every new patient, but sometimes it doesn't work for every new patient, and so you have to have that ambiguity tolerance and say, well, I can still help this person, but I'm going to have to treat that person just a bit differently, and I'm going to have to meet them where they are. In the book Mastery, and Robert Greene's accounting of mastery, he talks about mastery has to be a subscription to a lifelong apprenticeship. You have to always be a constant learner. And masters almost always have to push back against social pressure. You're always going to be somewhat of an outlier to the norm. And that's where the courage of your conviction comes in. You also have to look at it. It's not a fast track like money or fame. You've got to push back against some of those expectations and realize that if you are living the life that you have designed for yourself, those things flow with it. And there's often hurdles that come with that. So you remember he talked about 3 steps of mastery as the first apprenticeship is first is passive observation. So we can do that. We can go online now and learn almost anything about technical dentistry we want. We can observe that. We can go to lectures, almost anything. You can get it on your phone. You can be in the kitchen fixing dinner and start studying, cuss-foster relationships if that's your gig. If you want to be a dental geek like my patients tell me I am. But then the second phase is that intense practice. You've got to commit to doing. I had a conversation with Lee Brady the other day. We were talking about, about dental education and how, she's now working as the continuing education coordinator at the Pankey Institute. And we talked about, how you don't learn how to equilibrate. You don't learn splint therapy in that workshop. You learn the basics of it, but you learn it by doing, and you've got to commit to doing. You can't wait for all the circumstances to be perfect. You just have to get in there and understand the principles, take your time, be careful, do no harm, and just realize you're just making the patient, worse at the slowest possible rate. That's all it comes down to. And so that intense practice, I think Greene said in the book, it takes 10,000 hours of intense practice to master anything. Now, take that times all the stuff we do in dentistry. That's just one thing. It's 10,000 hours. And so it's going to take you probably 20, 30, 40,000 hours before you start to be able to assimilate all these concepts and bring them together. So be patient with yourself. Yeah. Be humble and open to experiences. Pain and struggle are your friend. I sometimes say I'm looking forward to my next failure, because what is it I'm going to learn from that? Try something new. And you also have to fail at, kind of pursuing your misguided expectations and trying to, push to your non-strengths before you find out who you really are.
Absolutely. Now, and I love what you're talking about, because when you learn to enjoy the process, I don't know who said this, it's very process-based thinking. You know, it's the process. It's always the process of getting. You really enjoy the process and the yield of the process, and that's where when you start focusing on the money or the output, that's where it becomes challenging. The opportunity here is where you get better. The other thing too, and I'm sure you've seen this. I think it's a Gatorade commercial where you hear all of these great athletes that we've seen, and they go, "You know, want to be successful, you fail." And J.J. Watt was one of the last ones. He says, "You want to be successful, start as a walk-on." And I love that, you know, because you do have to fail in dentistry. It's never going to be perfect. You're going to fail. The key is you can't repeat the failures. You know, you can fail once, but to repeat them, that's where you start to go insane, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and exactly. I think Jack Nicklaus used to say it about golf. He said, "You just want to miss it well. You know, you're still great at what you do, but miss it well. Know your risk involved. That's the key." And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Is that you have to understand the risk that you're assuming when you start to do something that is new to you. Right. And so, you know, you don't start to reconstruct an entire mouth that's been ravaged by disease for 40 years without understanding the principles of core diagnosis or something like that. So and Peter Dawson used to talk about this all the time. It was one of the key things he taught me. If you understand the principles, you can figure out the rest of it. Right. And if you're careful and move methodically in the direction, you move a step at a time and you don't assume too much risk. But you got to try it and realize that sometimes it's going to work out and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, I was like, there was a guy, Lenny Garfinkel was Rodney Dangerfield's nephew, and he used to lecture at the Pankey Institute. He had this great quote. He goes, "I'm here just to tell you, you know, what I know, and that's very little." He says, "You got skeletons in your closet. I'm renting warehouse space." You know, and truly, that's a lot of it. You know, if you look back, I've never looked back at any case and said I couldn't have done it a little better, but I'm still really proud of what I did because every one of them was maybe a little better than before, and that's what excellence is about. So sometimes I'm looking forward to my next failure, you know, and saying, what am I going to learn from it, you know, but I don't want it to be a catastrophic failure. You know, I just want it to be an incremental thing.
Absolutely. So, you know, finding mentors is absolutely key. What's the second key that you see in this whole process?
So I think that kind of dovetailing on that process of mastery and mentorship, you know, finding people who really represent the best and the best information in dentistry is that you have to start thinking big. And by thinking big, I don't mean bigger practice necessarily, volume. Right. I'm not talking about volume. I'm talking about taking a different perspective, about understanding the perspective of the people who you're learning from and saying, how can I apply that? How can I expand on that? I listened to Bill Robbins talk about core diagnosis the other day on your program, and he and I have had these conversations a lot. He said it wasn't to replace functionally generated treatment planning, you know, that Frank Spear did or any of those. It's to build on it. And so your mind should be building on those concepts. How do you take those things and think big? You know, I can do these things if I choose to. I can focus on these things. I can do anything I want to do. One of Steve Jobs' quotes that I love is that the things that you're utilizing, we're utilizing right now, you know, to do this webcast, were invented by people who are no smarter than you. And you can invent and you can be creative in how you approach things as well. And I think that creativity, a creative mind, is what dentists sometimes have to expand. Have that ambiguity tolerance. Yes, I learned that, you know, centric relation is this, but does everybody have to be there? How can I apply this in my practice in a practical way that makes sense for my patients, that fits with my values? So, you know, I think I told you my personal, you know, mantra is if everybody else is doing it, it's probably wrong. Right. And that comes from my general attitude of not following the herd, because herds just create ruts, and we all know that ruts are just a shallow grave. Right. And so, you know, I'm always looking at, who's got the best information, but how do we apply it? How does it influence my perspective? How does it influence my care that I'm bringing to my patients? And how do I use a curious mind to create, you know, a better system, a better platform, a better diagnostic process, a better environment, create more value? So thinking big, I think, is important. Thinking laterally, not just systematically. not just linearly. Think horizontally. How can I broadly apply this and really make a difference in somebody's life?
Yeah.
And I think as we think about restorative care, this is where it's coming down to, is that we've got all this information coming at us, bombarding us from every direction. And we have to be able to sort through the noise and say, what's really important, what's really applicable, and how do I translate that into my practice?
Yeah, I was just talking to a younger dentist before he jumped on here, and I told him, because he's looking at starting his own practice, I said, one of the greatest gifts that you're going to give yourself in this profession is just driving to work every day. You get out of your car, you walk into your building, you go, this is the way. I love this. This is the way I do it. It's good to take all this information. It is. But then ultimately, you've got to turn it in which it's a composite, a true composite of what you want to see every single day. And that's when it really starts to take off. That's what we consider compounding momentum in any practice. So love what you're saying here. Now, you have a lot of examples. Like this is not without struggle, because people, I think one of the things that people say, oh yeah, you guys, all these people you have on your show, it's like they got successful. I'm like, no. They lived 9 lives getting to this place. I mean, there's a considerable amount of struggle that happens in this whole process. And you've had plenty in your practice too, right?
Sure, absolutely. And again, you have to look at the process and say, I'm going to be comfortable with this. I'm going to have to try new things if I want to grow. I think one of my favorite quotes is a Descartes quote, the philosopher. It said, if you are to seek truth, at some point you will have to deny all things to the largest extent possible. You have to question all things. And so you have to be able to look back and say, what did I learn along the way? So, for example, I haven't been party to an insurance contract since 1989, which a lot of dentists listening weren't even born. So it's been a while. But I took a bold leap at that time. I didn't do it well. I totally flopped. Yeah. I just told everybody I'm not doing this anymore, and that wasn't really the right way to approach it. My practice dropped about 30% like that. I went, that wasn't so smart.
Right.
But it caused us to rethink how we communicate. It caused me to think differently about my personal leadership and behavioral style. Why did I jump to that so fast? And why wasn't I more deliberate about how to do that? And then it also taught us that also we can come back.
Right.
We lost that, but then we regained the income from that loss within 8 months. It was a short-term thing, and then we could overcome that. That was just one example of many. If we're learning from our failures, we could go on all day. That might be a whole different practice, maybe the worst practices show.
Don't do this.
The worst ideas show. Anyway, yeah. And then the other things too that I think are important for dentists to realize is that when you start learning from different masters and learning from some of the best people in the profession, you still should question them. You still should question for your own clarity. And so you can get into camps, and this is what happened kind of in the 90s and the early 2000s. And people, we're just going to do it this way. And everybody should fit in this box. And if I just get everybody in centric relation, it's all going to work great. Well, these are human beings. They're all different.
Right.
They'll change. And so, there's good validity in some of the learning. But like Dr. Dawson used to say, if you're going to quote me, date me.
Right.
Because things change all the time. So don't get caught up. What I learned is don't get caught up on a single philosophy and think everybody's got to fit, that into that peg. Because they don't. And I think the more you learn about all the wonderful things that are available to us to improve the health of our patients and not just do the mechanics, you realize that so powerfully.
Right, so, because the profession changes, the craft, the things that we know. You use the word, I love this, you call that dynamically adaptive dentistry. And it's one of the things you're a big supporter of. And tell me what that means. Like, tell the listeners, because I kind of get it, but define that.
So let's talk about in the context of the third point, which is the becoming a master diagnostician and an integrative practitioner. Now, I don't make any bones about this. I'm just representing, the smaller relationship-based practice, because I believe meaningful change still happens, like my friend Gary DeWood says, one patient at a time at the chair. Right. We do a lot of stuff in social media and web presence and SEO and SEM and all that marketing to drive people in. But meaningful change still happens one person at a time at the chair, at chair side. So I think becoming the master diagnostician and an integrative practitioner means that you start to look at your patients a bit differently. I think it means that you stop being a provider. You want to really upset me, call me a provider. I'm a professional, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm all of those things. Don't start minimizing me as a provider. And I don't think any dentist that's watching this should ever allow somebody to call them that again. I think it's the worst insult that's ever been put upon us. Set yourself apart. And we're caught in this trap of being a provider, because then it fits in this insurance game, which is a commodity trading business. And I don't think the future is in the commodity trading business. I've tried to compete saying my implants are better. I've tried to compete saying my cosmetic dentistry is better. I think our stuff's really good, but I know there's other people out there that are really good and some even better at that stuff. But if we're going to get into this competition about the hardware or about the procedure, I think it's a losing game, because that's where the corporate entities go. That's where the large volume practices go, because they have to compete on stuff, on hardware, on treatment. So to me, and it's just my personal opinion, but in this type of practice, the insurance game's a dead end street. That's why I backed out of it a long time ago, and I've not ever gotten back in it. It's not been easy sometimes, but I didn't. So in the practice of a dynamically adaptive dentistry, what we're looking at is we're looking at this person as a whole, and we're understanding that we're not just going to provide the hardware, but we're going to try to be practical and design their case, design their treatment, design their care in a way that gets them to the end point that we help discover with them, and is adaptive enough to withstand the changes that might happen in the future.
Right.
Because what you find out is that, no matter how great you've got that case and how pinpoint you've got those cusp-sponsor relationship and how you think that joint is stable, sometimes it's not. And so you've got to think about cases, individually, every patient one at a time, and say, what's their susceptibility? What's their level of adaptability? Where have they maladapted? And how can I make this more adaptive so it gives them the best chance to deteriorate at the slowest rate possible?
Yeah, and the truth of it is, too, also, is these people that you're working with are going to be living longer. 1 in 3 babies that's born today will actually live to be 100. So no matter how good of a clinician you are, there's forces you can't see. I mean, you're going to be managing forces that are beyond your control. We've got biological implications. We've got airway now to consider. We also have aesthetic challenges. You've got periodontal, so there's a lot going on there. So I think the ability to think on your feet as a dentist is going to be incredibly important. And then how'd you say that? I love that. Lower the rate of deterioration. I know where that thinking, who started that? Was that Barkley?
Bob Barkley. Yeah, okay. Bob Barkley. Yeah, we're just making the patient worse at the slowest rate possible. And that's what I think we have to shift from, because we have this mindset, and it comes from the traditional dental practice. If you get the margin perfect, if you get this perfect, if you get that perfect, it'll last the patient's lifetime, or at least an extended time. But there's so many other things involved. And as we open up to the idea of airway, for example, I learned this from Jeff Rouse. Jeff's a good friend, and he really upsets me, because just when I think I've got it figured out, I have to listen to him or Robbins, and I go have a glass of wine with him. I'm going, now I got to change everything again.
Right.
But I learned this from him. That everything we do, has to also consider the airway possibility when we're doing orthodontics. Can we expand the arch now to increase tongue space? Can we at least diagnose the level of breathing disorder? And it's not just about sleep. It's about functional breathing during the day as well. Can we influence children at a very early level to prevent this onslaught of orthodontics with people with narrow jaws? So we think about bicuspid extraction orthodontics that was in favor, back in the 80s and 90s. Now, and I'm not saying that, it was wrong. It was the best we knew to do at the time. But I have at least 6 cases I've seen in the last 6 months where that bicuspid extraction contributed to constricting the tongue, an airway issue, and a joint issue. Now, how that all interfaced, you have to kind of extrapolate from that patient's history. But in their treatment now, I have to think about that. Do I treat the joint first? Do I stabilize it? Do I go back and try to expand the arches? If I can expand them, how do I do that? But we have the tools to do that. But we want to think about that. So my goal is, make that practical. I love this quote by Richard Branson. He says, the future is best observed looking forward and up. Now, he's talking about space, of course, but the space metaphor is great. There's infinite possibility. And if you're looking forward and up, you'll start thinking about the possibility of all these interdisciplinary things becoming, well integrated with your patients. So, that there's implications with that too. You have to have an interdisciplinary team. You have to develop those people around you, and they develop you. We have a great team that I've, have the privilege of working with here. Mark Everest, Scott Hamilton, Kirk Vinci, people that are local now who we've learned together so that we can sit down and case plan these cases and look at all of these things that are known today and how they influence a patient. That's key is to develop those relationships. And you've got to be able to work with people who are willing to take the time to do this. We have what digital dentistry is giving us the wonderful opportunity to do, and I'm so anxious to learn more from Christian, like you talked about before, to take our game to the next level. We can share this information. We can share modeling. We can share CT scans. We can share imaging so rapidly that we don't have to physically cart all this stuff together. We can do a lot of it online and then get together and discuss the possibilities and what's the optimal plan for that patient. But it's building that interdisciplinary team that's so critical to your success, because you can't do it by yourself, and your team internally as well. We're learning to manage a whole bunch of different stuff when we start seeing airway problems in all these different patients. So that's a long answer to your question, but when I think of dynamically adaptive dentistry, I'm looking at it less from the mechanical standpoint. All those things are important, all those things are important, in marginal integrity and contours and shape and aesthetics and how teeth fit the face. But I want to think about it in the terms of how do I reduce the risk for this person? Right. How do I take this individual person and all the things they bring to the table, the behavioral things, even the psychological, the emotional stress that comes, with sometimes with people that have challenging problems, and make it so that they can have the best possible outcome.
Yeah. Now you have these conversations as well of being the Restorative Academy and the Newport Orofacial faculty. You're at Pankey now, also at Spear too. You get these young kids, and I get them too. They're 32, 31, starting their practice, and they're like, hey, look, I get it. I want a mentor. I want to be able to think big. I also need to improve diagnostically what I'm doing. But Jim, you don't understand. I have a lot of debt. I got little babies, and my practice is 95% insurance. Now, let's take that apart, because we do have dental students now that are watching this. What are your thoughts as people come to you, and where do you point them when it comes to these 3 keys? What's your suggestion?
So God bless you all that are coming out of school too. It's challenging, and we've all been through that. I mean, we've all been there. I came out of school with like $80,000 of debt, which would translate into about $250, $300 today. So we've all been there. We're all trying to make a living, feed our family, pay the bills, build a practice. and the first thing is a financial piece. Learn to live on less than what you make. That's a principle that Rich Green taught me that that I've always lived by, and that's important. Control your finances. You have to control your finances. If you start to control your finances, then you'll have capital to invest, at some point. But having a mentor is pretty cost effective. Most mentors, most people that see themselves as teachers, are willing to give of time. I have 3 or 4 dentists now that I mentor at some level, and I help them with their cases, and they come and observe the practice. They can come in and observe. Doesn't cost them anything. We can get them involved in a study group, and then we can start to get them involved in meetings where they can become at least exposed to some of this thinking, and then they can take the next step from there. Never stop learning. Every day, learn something new. Right. And you've got resources online too. That the digital platform at Spear, you can learn a lot just getting engaged in that, and that's not a huge investment. And other places have those too. But that's probably the most developed right now.
Right. And let me piggyback on what you just said, because mentorship, and I think you would agree with this, is different than it was when I got started. Because when I got started 20 plus years ago, there were words like preceptorships. And then a dentist would come and find you and say, because I can remember a long time ago, they'd say, hey, come to my office on Friday. We'll all work together. I'll show you a couple things. I'm going to make sure that you're taking good care of your patients. And that was pretty cool. Nowadays, people don't do that. And I would say,
so I'll go ahead and piggyback on what I think he was going to say was, until he gets back online here, is that, mentorship is different than it was. There are still people out there that are willing to take you under their wing and help you. And there are study clubs available that also, are predominant, that are much more accessible than they ever were. And so those are ways that you can get plugged in and get some help and get some perspective. Now, you got to go back and do the work. You got to learn how to do a bite registration. You got to learn how to evaluate your joints. You got to learn how to assess risk on patients, so that you're walking through this in a way that makes sense. But there are many ways to start without having to lay down $5 or $6 grand for a 3-day course or a week course right off the bat. And there are smaller versions of those courses as well that require less investment. Let your mentors sort of guide you in the best ways possible. Yeah,
absolutely. And then what about the insurance thing? Because I know, I get this question all the time. It comes up in almost every conversation. You add the word insurance, it can become a heated, emotional debate. And I get it. You got to start somewhere. But the future of this is not necessarily to get off of insurance completely. It's just to lessen the influence it has on your decision making daily and with your patients. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So it just depends on what you want for yourself. Now, in 1989, I said I disconnected from the system. Now, it was just starting to change then. We still had patients that had routinely had $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year benefits in 1989 and 1990, and that's rare to find now. So let's be clear. It's not insurance. It's a very small benefit in most cases. Right. But our patients have been brainwashed to think that dental insurance is like medical insurance. Medical insurance, you go in, if you get really ill, you have a lot of problems. You might have to lay out $2,000 as your stop loss limit, or cover your deductible, and then the rest is taken care of. In dentistry, you'll be lucky to get $2,000. It doesn't equate. So the first part is helping patients, just be an advocate to help them get whatever benefit it is. But don't confuse the two. You've got to get that in your own head first, that this is not really insurance. And just say, yes, we're going to help you get every penny of benefit you can. But it got down to this for me, is that I couldn't treat patients individually and do my best stuff with someone constricting me to do it a certain way for a certain fee every time. And it just didn't work as a business model. And I don't think I think it's going to get more difficult, not less, in terms of the amount of compensation that an insurer will provide for a patient. So we have taken the opportunity to be an advocate for our patients.
I am not sure what happened there. Did I lose you?
We thought you blacked out. But that's
oh
okay.
No, my internet it's gone out twice. So keep going. Whenever that happens, you just keep going.
Yeah, we're going on without you, brother.
Right.
So I don't think that's going to get any better. And here's the crux of it is that, if I'm spending the time I need to spend with patients, and my team is really, really doing our best stuff, and I can't get compensated for that, I'm not going to do it very long. Let me give you an example of what I see, with splint therapy. Splint therapy takes a lot of time if you're doing it to relax musculature, to identify a condylar position, to reduce inflammation, to be a descriptor of your final condylar position for your restorative work, and to utilize that in whatever you do, whether it be orthodontics or restorative. It takes a whole lot of time. So I'll typically, if somebody's got an occlusal muscle disorder, an intercapsular problem, has a history of pain, and has an airway issue on top of that, that's going to take hours to work out over the course of time. So say, for example, your crown fee is $1,500, right? And it takes you an hour, hour and a half to prep it and see, and a half hour to seat it, just being generous, 2 hours, $1,500. So you're spending about $750 an hour on that. So if I'm spending about 4 or 5 hours on my bite splint, I've got to really have an equivalence there, right? So it's got to be thousands of dollars, not hundreds. Because if I'm just saying, well, your insurance covers $500 of this, and that's all I can do, and I know I've got to spend the time there to really define this in a way that's significant for this patient, I get into an ethical problem, don't I? And so it's an ethical issue for me. It becomes an ethical issue. I've got to be able to charge for that, which means I've got to be able to bring exceptional value to it because it's going to come out of their pocket. So that's just kind of one example of when you start really looking at this type of dentistry, you're going to be able to work within the bounds of some of those plans. But then there's some things that you're going to have to be able to stretch beyond that, and that's where the tension comes in, and that's where your growth comes in, and that's when you have to really have an exceptional team that can just blow them away, so that becomes a secondary issue. Takes a lot of time, so don't do like I did. Don't be like me, and dump the insurance right away. But start to have a conversation with your patients and say, look, I'm learning every day, and I hope, Mrs. Jones, that you understand that our work, my goal is to be better today than I was yesterday. We're all about excellence here. And what I'm finding is that the constraints of some of these insurance plans are not allowing us to do our best stuff. What would you think if I decided not to be a participant in this, yet help you get whatever benefits are possible? Start having those conversations in hygiene years in advance. And then you can have a metric. How many people will stay with me? And by the way, those are the ones who love you. And how many people won't? And then you can calculate. And then you can say, if I raise my fees 10%, 15%, I can lose 20% of my practice and be as profitable, if not more, because my expenses are down now, because I'm not paying people to sit on the phone, argue with insurance companies, ad nauseum. And I can feel better about my dentistry, and I can have more free time, and I can get home at a reasonable hour and see my kids. So it's the whole lifestyle issue. So I understand it, and if I can help anybody with that, look at what they're doing and help them. Look at a 5-year plan of starting to move this turn the ship in a different direction, if that's your goal. But you got to be willing to work hard at it. You can't give up. For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves, there's one striking at the root, and that's a Thoreau saying. And if you can get at the root of the problem, you're going to be a lot happier. So decide what you want for yourself, and maybe a mix is good for you. But this is, it's my bias to my style of practice. It's not everybody's, and I understand that, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Any last pieces of advice you'd give to dentists looking at a great career dentistry in front of them? Maybe what not to do, or what to do for sure? What have you learned for sure?
So I think that you have to become the physician of the masticatory system. I really think that's where the future is.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the stuff we have today, I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that orthodontics could be done online, and a huge majority of it today can be done with invisible aligner, with clear aligners. Who would have thought that?
I would have told you were crazy if you said
you were
that.
nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So realize implants are going to go away.
Right.
And not too far in the future, we're going to be growing roots again. Composites are going to go away. We're going to grow enamel. People are going to get healthier in ways that don't require all the stuff. So while you might focus on the stuff now and the hardware, I think you have to have an expansive mindset. I think the practitioners that are coming out today, young practitioners graduating from dental school, realize a lot of you have been taught the same stuff that I was taught 150 years ago. That's just not going to work in the future, So find some people who can start to help you build that vision of the future. I think your value is going to be created, in what you can do for your patients and working in a collaborative effort with them to design care that's appropriate for them. To build a wellness model, because that won't go away.
Yeah.
Care, skill, and judgment won't go away. The hardware will. Articulators are going away. It'll be all online. I could design the case online, in a matter of minutes now. It's awesome. That'll all go away. So it's not, how to set the articulator anymore. It's just how to get the jaw to track and put it into digital form. So that's all going to go away. So think, how are you going to stay ahead of that curve? And I think Dr. Dawson said, become a master diagnostician, become the physician of the masticatory system, and stay on top of that, forward looking and looking up.
Yeah, very well said, buddy. And like you did for me, if you're watching this and you're struggling with what the future looks like, find people like Jim or others in your community. Say, hey, look, I need your help, because here's what I'm thinking. Tell me a better way to think about this. Because when you get your thinking right, you can now put all the systems in action and your game plan together. So, Jim, I know you do this really well. You've done this for me and a lot of young dentists that I've sent over that want to watch you work. I'm going to say your email address for those that are listening to iTunes. It's jotten@sunflower.com. You love questions. You love engaging with other people. So if you need, you're always there to answer any questions, correct?
Yeah.
They can find you. Also find you through your website.
May not get to it real fast, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah,
so we'll get back to you.
When
you got 36,000 people listen to this, I can't handle all those in one day.
Neither can I. So let's do this, Jim. Stay on for just a second while we say goodbye to everybody. But thank you guys for watching today. If you enjoyed today, do me a favor, just hit the share button, share with your friends. We love great information like this to get out and protect this profession we love so dearly. And keep sending us suggestions for shows you want to see. We'll do them as best we can to get them on here. And until we see you next time, keep watching the Best Practices Show. You guys have a great rest of your day.